Different cultures have a different attitude towards death and dying. Hawaii is a multicultural state that consists of varied ethnicities. Although the values, beliefs, and customs blend in the cultures that compose the Hawaiian population, traditional death attitudes remain the same. Native Hawaiians believe in communicating with the deceased. For example, if a rainbow were to appear in the sky, they would believe the deceased person would be speaking to them, and it has a positive effect on them. Different religions and spiritual orientations in Hawaii may also lead to different attitudes on death and dying. Filipinos traditionally spend 3 days and nights at the cemetery where the person that died is buried. They do this out of respect for the person. When someone passes, Native Hawaiians view the process of death and grief as a way to express goodbyes and grace to the deceased, a, pro- a process that goes at its own pace and can't be hurried. Storytelling is a common way to cope in Hawaii when someone passes. It is a time to bring up memories of the deceased and a way to keep the spirit alive. The Hawaiian culture believes that when a person dies, the deceased spirit remains in the world. Hawaiian families observe death with solemn rituals which honor the deceased and enable the living to accept death. Funerals are a time for friends and relatives to gather together to express their closeness and unity. A religious or otherwise respected person conducts a service honoring the deceased before the casket gets buried into the ground. Unlike traditional American funerals where guests wear black, Hawaiian funerals typically have guests wear bright colors. A funeral is a time to celebrate the individual's life. While people mourn at the funeral, there is a party-like atmosphere. Families and friends have parties to help them let go of the dead so they can move forward. Families and friends will gather after the funeral to have a celebration together that evening. This is also a time when storytelling takes place. Family and friends will share food as well as talk about the deceased person. Sharing memories and laughter is a part of this event. Attitudes toward organ donating among Native Hawaiians are mixed. It can range from a person who already had designated themselves as an organ donor on their driver's license to a person who said they or any member of their family would never donate organs. The reason some would choose not to donate their organs after they die is because of religious or spiritual beliefs. Some say they are not in favor of organ donation because they don't want to be born in the next life missing organs. Others are in favor of organ donation because they believe that it's the soul that is reborn after death, not the body, and the fact that it would help someone in need of an organ. The other reason why a person might have their organs donated after they die is if they discussed with their family and said they want their organs donated after they die. Many people that know they want their organs donated discuss this with their family to make them aware.
In Hawaii, as in many different cultures, a funeral is seen as a form of celebration. Traditional Hawaiian principles emphasize death as a time for family members to unite and get together. Native Hawaiians have learned to accept death and honor their loved ones through the use of different customs and historical traditions. The Aha Ainemake, also known as a funeral feast, was a tradition used for celebrating life and comforting those who lost their loved ones. Even years after the death of the person, many Hawaiians would have a feast to honor them. To this day, family members gather and continue to remember the deceased in this special way. For the most part, Native Hawaiians prefer their own traditional burials as opposed to cremation processes, which were seen as a form of punishment. This was because of their ancient belief that bones or iwi were symbols of immortality that should not be destroyed. Hawaiians believed that the spirits of the deceased were nearby, watching and listening to what was being done, so to them it was of great importance to be respectful and to do things properly. The most common practice was to deposit the dead in a cave as it was believed that caves were sheltered from the weather and served as a better way to preserve bones. These types of burials were sometimes done in secret to prevent disturbances to the body by outsiders, especially during the burial of a chief or special individual. A ceremony would be performed inside the cave for purification, and both a kahu or cave keeper and a mopu, whose blood was used for sacrifice against evil, were involved in the ritual. Before leaving the cave, the relatives would perform the following chant as a goodbye to the person deceased. Aloha na hale, o mawa I, maka maka ole, ka alanui hele, nauka o huli wale, e huli ae, am au I, makana ia, oe a. Aloha wale, e kawa a. In English, grieve for our home without our friend. The road that leads to the mountain, gainless search. I'm seeking a gift for you, alas. Boundless love, oh, name of the dead, between us, alas. Many hidden caves still exist to this day. Another common practice was the sand or earth burial. Deceased bodies were considered unclean and had to be taken care of by a blood relative for a period of time before an actual ceremony took place. For those of higher status, there was a wait of 10 days, while the common people were given a 2 to 3 day wait period. Only blood relatives could take care of the deceased body if the death happened in a house. Those in the house were not allowed to go anywhere or to touch anyone else during this period. The insides were then removed by the family, and the body was prepared for the burial. Hawaiians would then take the body of the deceased, wrapped in a kapa, and place it in the haula baskets or koa caskets, which were built by the family. Other Hawaiian traditions included the use of music performed by ukuleles, as well as the placement of the individual's favorite things close to their body in order to honor them and help them in their departure. It was believed that if those things were kept by the family, the deceased would keep lingering in the house. Therefore, the belongings were also buried with the deceased person as a symbol of the separation from the family. In addition, there was a ritual of talking to the dead, in which the deceased person was told to go on so that the living could keep on living. After returning home from the burials, ritual customs of purification were done in order to purify all of those who had been in contact with the dead. For this, salt was used in a ceremony called hikai, in which salt water was sprinkled around the house and other places in order to get rid of the bad spirits who may have come about after death and to bring in good luck. Another ceremony, known as kapu kai, was also done for purification by having those who were in the burial bathe in the Hawaiian Sea. Native Hawaiians saw the importance of cultivating the deceased as another part of their many traditions. Therefore, many Hawaiians would bury the remains of their ancestors in their land and then plant fruits, which were fertilized by the decomposed remains of the deceased. Through this practice, their ancestors became a part of the land in which they continued to live, and the foods that they ate out of that land nourished them and provided nutrients to keep on surviving for future generations. It was an important spiritual relationship between the living and the dead, which they called ikahi.
This tells us the emphasis that traditional Hawaiians had on maintaining their family burial sites and the importance of continuing to pass these practices to future generations.
Unfortunately, many of these old customs became lost due to the European arrival in 1779. The colonization of Hawaiian territory had an impact on the native people as it inflicted changes in their way of life and in many of their cultural customs and traditions. The population began to decrease immensely, and many native Hawaiians were taken out of their lands to be moved somewhere else, leaving behind their ancestral roots and burial sites. They were stripped off many of their cultural values, and the lands of their ancestors were dug up and used for studies and museums in places all around the globe. This separation from their historical traditions caused great changes throughout the entire Hawaiian land, which some still wish to preserve. Many believe that the Hawaiian people deserve to retain their traditions and regain what was lost. As seen in Hawaiian news outlets, there have been suggestions by Native Hawaiians, Mahialani, Cypher, and Rocky Kaluhiwa of bringing back some of the traditions and of creating a Hawaiian section in one of Hawaii's cemeteries. These historical traditions are said not to violate the current state law and could potentially be less expensive than traditional burial methods for those Hawaiians that do not wish to use caskets or those who make their own.
Native Hawaiians view the grieving process as individualistic and not to be hurried by others. Mourning begins when the person dies. Messengers in the olden days were used to immediately alert close family and friends of the passing. Food is prepared shortly after the death for visitors coming to pay their respects. No one was allowed to wail loudly in the home until the body was cleaned and dressed, for fear that the spirit might remain and be alarmed by all the noise. Once a family member passes, the family may wait 2 to 3 days before burying them. This stems from the ancient Hawaiians' fear of burying a person who is not really dead. During these 2 to 3 days, the heart is felt for a pulse frequently to make sure the person remains dead. Some of the old customs used for preparing a loved one's body for a burial still can be found in today's Hawaiian culture. It is believed by many that once a family member passes, no one can touch their body until they're preparing it for the burial. Since the body is now empty, it can take anyone's mana, or divine power. Once it is time to prep the body for the burial, it is tradition for the family of the deceased one to bathe and dress the body when the person dies in their home. Salt water is commonly used in the process to clean the body. Back in ancient Hawaii, pieces of salt were placed in the deceased's navel for preservation purposes. In rural areas of Hawaii where mortuary services are not readily available, this service may still be used today. The salt water used to cleanse the body is called wakala, or water of forgiveness. It is believed that in addition to preserving the body longer, it also acts as a purification of the dead soul. Today's clothing for the burial greatly differs from ancient Hawaii. The person usually closest with the deceased, either a parent or child, is the one who dresses the body. In older times, dressing the body began with creating a diaper out of bark cloth stuffed with silk in order to keep the fluid from excluding from the body and deter any smells as a result. The lower body was wrapped in a similar material to create a skirt-like item called a pau, while the upper half is draped in a kekepa by using similar material that drapes under one arm and over the other. The sides of the kekepa are fastened with pebbles. Today, people are often dressed in their favorite clothes. Once the body is prepared, visitors are allowed to come into the house. Loud wailing will take place during this time as a testament to the deceased one. Wails normally consist of specific words or characteristics of the deceased. Once the body is prepared and visitation is complete, it is taken to the place of funeral or memorial services. In ancient Hawaii, the body was removed from the home and taken to the place of burial in 3 different ways: rolled in a mat and bound with cords to carry, rolled in bark cloth and put into a canoe, or placed in a net then drawn together and slung around a pole. Today, mortuary services exist in Hawaii to help assist with the removal of the body. While cremation is frequently used today in Hawaii, it was not used by Native Hawaiians due to former practices and beliefs of their culture. The bones of a person, also called the iwi, are believed to hold the person's spirit and thus are considered sacred. Burning the bones would be an insult to the deceased and a destruction of their spirit. For Native Hawaiians today, if cremation does take place, the process may differ slightly. The normal process may be interrupted to remove bones before they are disintegrated. Because burials are more commonly used, the body is normally taken to a funeral home or a church for a wake the night before the funeral. Funeral services can take place anywhere, including churches, temples, beaches, mountaintops, on the water, or the traditional funeral home or mortuary. The choice of where the service takes place is normally dependent on the individual's religious background. The majority of services are Christian or non-denominational. Today, Hawaiian funerals are attended by family and friends. Attendants of the funeral normally wear black or white. The tradition of sprinkling salt water on the coffin, as well as those who attend the services, still remain today in order to purify the spirits. Chanting is also a tradition that can be found in today's funerals. It may consist of stating who the deceased was, who their spouse and children are, and what the deceased did in life. This was believed to cement the memory of the deceased into the mourner's memories. Music is often played during this ceremony, with instruments such as a ukuleles or guitar. Flowers are often used, and floral leis are draped over caskets by mourners as a gift to the family. In addition to or in lieu of flowers, a new tradition seen in Hawaii is to give money with a funeral card to the family of the deceased, in order to assist with funeral expenses as well as honor the deceased and their family. Hula can still be seen at some native Hawaiian funerals. It is a dance that uses the arms, body, and feet to tell a story. Hula is considered a sacred gesture during funerals and can be used to express adoration of the deceased or to ask for forgiveness from the spirits. Some refer to this as praying with the whole body. After the funeral, there is often a feast for the close friends and family to attend. These feasts are considered parties to celebrate the deceased's life. During this time, family and friends often exchange stories and memories of those who have passed and reflect on life itself. This allows the families to let the dead go and move on.
In Hawaiian culture, death and the events surrounding one's death are extremely important. According to Kimberly Elena Gaylord, it is the belief in Hawaiian culture that after death, the loved one's spirit who has passed on lingers near the body for an indefinite amount of time. According to Gaylord, the presence of the dead spirit near the associated remains, as well as the bones' identification of their dead, thus serving as an essential link for future generations of native Hawaiians to understand and know their ancestors who have passed on. The bones of a person were and are considered very sacred. They possess the very core of the individual, what native Hawaiians called mana. Mana is described as a person's power, but not in the sense Western civilization might think of it. Everything on earth has mana. According to positive thinking Hawaiian style, it flows not only through human beings, but through the earth and everything that lives on it or above it. Mana is considered the inner power that gives each thing its own creativity. Mana is the power of the sea and the wind through the clouds. It is the power of human beings to be creative. The belief is that by doing good things and putting good into the earth, a person will increase his or her mana. Violence and other destructive behaviors decrease mana. The mana remains in the bones of a person who has passed on, which is why the protection of the bones is so important to the Hawaiian people. Once the preparations of the body have taken place, which has been explained earlier in this video, the body is then ready for its burial. In ancient times, various burial practices were done. The remains of chiefs of the tribes were often hidden in cave burials so that enemy tribes would not steal their remains and use them as shark bait or carve their bones into fish hooks or arrows. This was one of the more desecrating things to do to a person's remains, or bones, as it was previously mentioned that their mana lives on in their remains. Cave burials were also a common practice for commoners. In cave burials, a person's prepared remains or bones most frequently were wrapped together in some sort of fetal position, as seen in the picture, and laid to rest so as to not be disturbed. Other common practices were home burials, where bodies or bones were laid to rest under the house, or they even had their own homes close to the living family's house. When laid to rest in home burials, feet were always pointed towards the door of the home, according to Kimberly and Gaylord. This image shows an actual Hawaiian cave where human remains have been found. Other burials included sea burials and partial volcanic burials. According to Betty Fuller Leo, during partial volcanic burials, the worshippers of Pelel threw a part of the bones of their dead into the volcano, under the impression that the spirits of the deceased would then be admitted to the society of volcanic deities, and that their influence would preserve the survivors from the ravages of volcanic fire. Sea burials were another form of burials used. In more ancient times, people who believed their ancestors and their family's god resided in the sea would scatter their loved ones' remains back into the sea. If parts of the flesh were eaten by sharks, it was believed that the sharks would not touch the family of the body since it carried with it the essence of their relative should a boating accident occur. In more modern-day practice, sea burials are still practiced regularly. A canoe is made ready for the family to ride out to the sea with the remains of the loved one, while others may gather on surfboards and wade out into the ocean waters with them. The family and the loved ones will paddle out and spread the ashes into the ocean, followed by a spreading of flowers and leis. The family will stay out in the ocean for a while to pay their respects. After the arrival of Christian missionaries to the Hawaiian Islands in the early 1800s, burials were slightly altered. Instead of being buried in the fetal position, it became more common to see bodies laid flat in a coffin. In the photo shown, these are some other examples of cave burials and what archaeologists have found when excavating Hawaiian burial caves, which has caused controversy of its own, according to Gaylord and Maxwell. In older Hawaii, grave markers were not typically used unless that person was of high status, such as a priest or a chief. Even still, though, particularly graves of chiefs were kept secret to make sure the tribe's enemies would not steal their bones. If a grave was marked in any way, it would usually be a gathering of stones placed around the body or on top of the body. Families of commoners might mark graves with stones surrounding the place where the bones were buried. This became more common when cave burials were not used as often. In more modern times, actual grave markers are used, much like the ones you would see in continental North America. When a person dies, their soul will remain for a time with its body or bones, as mentioned earlier. Once the spirit's duties have been completed, whether that be to protect the family or to allow the family to grieve his or her passing, the soul will begin its journey to the leaping off point, so that it may join the other spirits in the afterlife. A leaping off point is typically a place on the island that juts out into the ocean or sea. According to Green and Beckwith, in every district is a prominent point of land jutting out into the sea, which, in English, is called leaping place of the soul, whence the soul takes its final leap on its way to the regions of the dead. In Hawaiian culture, particularly in practicing traditional Hawaiian beliefs about the afterlife, the belief is that there are 3 places the soul might go. Depending on the god that is worshipped, it determines where the soul will go once the person has departed his or her body. According to Laura Green and Martha Beckwith, the 3 places are the volcano, in the water, and on the dry plains of the island of Maui. According to the god one worshipped was the fate of the soul. The spirits of those who worshipped the sun followed the sun god. Others went in the direction of the moon, or it followed the course of the wind, all depending on the god whom they worshipped on earth. Others picture the dead as living in an underworld called Melua, conceived very much in the spirit of the Hebrew Hades. Here the spirits dance the hula or drama dance, quite different from modern form. Here they feast on shadowy food and lead a drowsy existence. The image you see now has the printed words of an old Hawaiian chant often used during traditional Hawaiian burials or periods of mourning. According to Rubelet Johnson, the Hawaiian kanaku, a dirge, lamentation, or chant of mourning, is a melody with the express purpose of celebrating those who have gone, in English, on the path of no return. The kanaku, however, is a dirge not only for the dead. It can be a lament for anyone who is leaving for a long time or having left is perhaps to never return or be seen again. The kanakua was of itself a poem in praise of the life of a person. In contrast, the mela inoa, or name song, is a celebration of a person's descent, more of a preparation of a life of worth and dignity with a dimension of family or ancestral pride. The kanakua is more deeply involved with the person's having lived with his or her connection to others who may remember him or her in circumstances where they were raised together, went to school together, or in walks of life where the person was truly known. A kanakua expressed the pride and in a greater Hawaiian family notion. This was just one example of a chant used during such times. It is also interesting to note that there were such things as professional wailers who would come and offer chant and wails on behalf of the family for the deceased's passing. The Hawaiian culture is beautiful and is centered around unity and peace among others. Their beliefs about the afterlife are as unique as the islands and islanders themselves. When discussing Hawaii, it is important to remember the word aloha. Not only is it a greeting and a word used to say goodbye, but according to the Hawaiian people, it is a way of life. So remember the culture and the beauty of its ideas about death and the passing on into the other world, and on behalf of the Hawaiian culture that has been presented, aloha.